Welcome to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. This is Chris Miller. I invite you to join me as I interview artists from a variety of disciplines. We'll share powerful stories and lessons learned while making their art. Good morning. You're listening to the Spiritual Artist Podcast, and this is Chris Miller. I have an exciting guest today. I'm really excited to introduce him, Randy Padorr-Black. He is a local artist in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and we have been attracted together, I suppose, from my adventures with this spiritual artistry. I met Randy through my Instagram page at the Spiritual Artist Podcast, and we have automatic syncopation here. We connect so well. So let me introduce Randy Padorr-Black. Good morning, Randy.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm in the flow right now.
That is great. I am too. Folks, Randy and I have already had like a little pre-conversation, and it's almost hard to stop us from talking. There's so many interesting things to talk about. But I was talking to Randy about my book that I'm writing, The Spiritual Artist, and how I had discovered an American art critic, Harold Rosenberg. And he defined something that is called action painting. And that is the communication or the recording of your state on canvas. I love this term, Randy, and I wanted to bring it up with you because I love your work, and it is so open and free. You can just see the movement in it of your brush strokes.
Yeah, I reject it if it's not there. You know, I have a lot of rejections. So you just do it, and if it works, it doesn't. And if it works, that's great. But fear gets in the way, you know.
So we had talked about flow, and a lot of my book is about how to maintain that flow. And I would look at your work and say, this guy's got it. I mean, there is such a smoothness to your brushstrokes. And I'm going to tell the listeners, you use a lot of what I call it Japanese Sumi brushwork. Is that the correct term?
I've done that too. I really have a lot of veneration for that art form, but I do it in a more abstract way because I don't do pictures of animals or scenes or whatever, but I've always loved the fluidity of it. And I'm really influenced by Zen. When I was in the Army, of all places, I picked up a book at the library, and it was on Zen Buddhism. And then when I was young, my teachers would always say, fill up the canvas, fill up the drawing. You have too much white space. And I thought, no, it just didn't feel right. I felt that the white space was important. Well, when I picked up the book on Zen, I realized, you know, they value white space as much as they do the drawing itself or the painting. And then I was hooked from that point on.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. A few episodes back, I interviewed Michael Parkey. He's a landscape architect, and he talks about the empty spaces, you know, and it's very important in a painting. I think you're right. So many people want to fill the whole canvas, but sometimes it's what's not there that is even more interesting than what is there.
Well, yeah, it's as important. I think, you know, I look at calligraphy because I've always loved, you know, calligraphy from the East. And the thing that impresses me is that the white space that is left, even though it's just black and white, you know, that white space reads as importantly as the black.
Randy has a similar background to me, graphic arts. And I think when we use computers, we're so contained to those strong, straight lines, you know? And so you realize there's such a freedom in that dappled edge, right? That
right.
That in-between space. It's not a tight, straight line like on a computer. And
no. But and I've done my saving grace was doing illustration that whole time that I was, you know, I've been doing graphic design, and the illustration was the fun part, you know, because even though I worked in a computer program called Illustrator, which has hard lines and everything, my style was pretty much almost Matisse-like as far as the cut paper period that he was working, the jazz series. And so that's what got me interested in doing that on computer. but with really bold colors and everything, and really flat colors, And then, when I got into collage recently, that's when I started painting the paper that I used and then putting that in the collage.
Okay. Well, when we talked about this, so I want to give us a chance to talk about this. We talked about flow.
That's how we connected, and I brought it to you that there's a flow to a painting. And you just made a point earlier that there's sometimes you have to get past the fear to get to that, to get past. How would you explain that process? What is the fear that holds us back?
Making a mistake. Nobody wants to ruin a canvas or ruin a paper that they're working on that they may have spent, $6 or $7 for that piece of paper because they want to use archival, good quality paper. So nobody wants to have to throw it away. I think one of the advantages of doing collages along with paintings is that if I fail at a collage, it's not that big a deal. It's $7 for the paper. But if I fail at a painting, like I said, I can recycle.
Right.
Or if I see some aspect of it that I like. As a matter of fact, I did a painting not too long ago where there's one part of a painting I really liked, the rest was just a failure. So what I did is I just blew that area up into a painting. It came out nice.
I have that in my book. I talk about focus on what's working. Like you just said, find that area that's working and blow it up.
Right.
I'm sure there's artists out there that sometimes I blow it up by expanding it on the canvas. Sometimes I blow it up by actually cutting the canvas down. I've literally taken a sheet of paper and it cut my painting down to the area that I think is working,
Yeah, I've done that too. Yeah. And it's like, well, I can look at it and say if I did a Sumi drawing not too long ago or painting. Parts of it failed, but parts of it were really, really nice. So I'll just frame it and I'll frame it, into a real small space and do that.
You get that little bit that looks perfect and beautiful, and you keep it. So, and I wanted to comment on something you said earlier too. I think as an artist, we get inhibited by the cost of what we're working with, whether it's the paint or the canvas. It's only when, you have to almost liberate yourself from that responsibility, and know that sometimes it's going to be a wasted piece of a good paper or some good acrylic that you're going to lose, but you have to break through that fear too, don't you?
Yeah, I remember, I don't know, Picasso said it or somebody said it about Picasso, is that he didn't feel like he had to do a masterpiece every time he painted. He just painted, and when I read that, I thought, well, that's cool, because he wasn't that, his stuff has a fearlessness to it, and that's why it's really good.
Yeah. And so let's talk about that too, because you and I had talked about earlier, and when I see your work, I see this wonderful movement through it. And I see a fearlessness where you're hitting that canvas. It's large with these wonderful strokes. You're definitely a great mark maker. I love that term. And I love the marks you make. I love the way you're isolating the composition. But when we talk about this process of flow that we feel, you had mentioned something about, I had mentioned, well, time disappears. Time disappears when I do this. And you said you had a theory for that. So I'm curious as to what your theory is.
My theory is that if you can imagine, you're looking at a horizon, okay, and it's three-dimensional, and you're from the ground to the sky is the world of time and space and causation. This is the time, time matters, cause and effect matters. And then below the horizon, into the earth maker, if you want to look at it that way, is a timeless, intuitive place. So that is really, that's what you're tapping into, as far as I'm concerned, when you enter that zone. And what happens is that you create a portal between the two zones, the time space and no time space. And when you're doing creativity of any kind. And I want to preface that saying that creativity doesn't necessarily have to be artistic. It can be working on a engineering problem. It can be working on a designing an architectural, a house or something like that, or solving a problem in theoretical physics. When you're in that zone, you open up that portal, and so that portal, you're allowing the timeless, intuitive to creep up into the outer world. And so where you're working in that portal, you're in a timeless zone, even though technically you may be sitting at a desk and you think that, I'm here in time, space, causation, but when that portal is open, there isn't that. That flow is coming from the depths of your intuition into the outer world. And so that's why you have no sense of time.
That's wonderful. I have often thought that when I painted, sometimes I'll do a really great piece of work in such a short amount of time. Other times I'll stretch and work on a piece of work for a long period of time, because I think it's the quality of that connection. You talk about that portal. Right. I think what my paintings record is the quality of that connection when I did it.
Correct. And I likened it to when I've done meditation for decades. And a lot of people will say, well, God, you just sit there and do nothing for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and these are time, space, causation people. And they go, that seems sort of stupid, or I just don't get it, And, for years I didn't get it either, but I did it on sort of an act of faith, But what's interesting is I found that basically you're opening up that portal when you meditate. And so when you're doing a painting, you're looking for a manifestation of that intuition. When you're meditating, you're not looking for a manifestation. You're just trying to get no mind. And so you really train that connection so that you can open up that portal sort of on command. And like you say, some days your portal opens up and it's great, and some days it just doesn't work,
Yeah, we all have that experience, and
yeah.
And I've learned to give myself permission. If it's not opening, you can't force that portal, right? I mean, meditation is not about force.
No, or intuition, And I think that when you say sometimes you just sit there and bam, 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 and it's done, and it's like and it just has that energy. My philosophy is that the reason that the general public can look at what is called an artistic masterpiece, and feel the same thing, even though it was done 200 or 300 years ago, is that when that artist was in that portal, that what they created and manifested it's in the DNA of that piece. Okay. And so when you see it, you sense that DNA. And so that, okay, that's a portal piece, and yet I had a friend, and we used to, he lived in Pennsylvania, and he was an artist. He would send these JPEGs and stuff that he had done, and I'd tell him, oh, no, that's crap. This one's really good. And so over time, several years, he really, really got good. He's a great artist. And the key to it is he would send it out to all his Facebook friends. Well, it's funny, the ones that I liked, they also liked. But they weren't like art critics. They weren't artists in the true sense, but they recognized that energy.
Well, it's like they recognize the basic humanness of it, or the what I would like to term it spirituality, the spiritualness of it. That's why I call it the spiritual artist. Randy, the more you talk, I'm like, wow, we were twins separated at birth, because I really agree with everything you're saying. And I think that when you approach that canvas, it is a type of meditation. For me, I have to do a sort of meditation to get grounded, and then I act, and then I perform. And
yeah, you have your ritual. Everybody
right.
has ritual. How do you get into that space when you're doing it?
Oftentimes I love nature. So I have a big window in my studio and I just sit there calmly and I watch nature. And what I call it moments of awe, but I look for signs of that creative energy in nature, just
Right.
the explosion of a bird building its nest, or a tree growing, or a spider making a web like on the awning of the house. And I just see all that creativity and I just feel it. I just feel it.
Right. To intuition. I don't think there's a single artist that doesn't have their form of intuition. Their portal. How they open them, throw themselves up to it. And I really believe that you have sometimes where you might have a streak of a couple of weeks where your portal's not working, or you just don't want to look at another canvas for a while, and that's great. You take some time off.
Right. And give yourself permission to take the time off, because the more you push to it. And that's what I call surrender. The more you push, the further away you get,
Right. Or the crappier the piece comes.
Yes.
Oh my God. You look at it, or sometimes I'll get away from it and then come back the next morning and I'll go, oh my God, and I'll just take that and turn that canvas toward the wall and start over.
I do the same thing where it goes either way though. Sometimes I'll think this is fantastic. And then I get up the next morning and go, oh my Lord. And sometimes the opposite. Sometimes I'll be doing something. I'll go, ugh, this isn't working. And then I get up and I'm like, wow, this is working.
Well, a lot of people, they'll post stuff on Instagram and to see how people react to it. And it's interesting, they'll say, do you think I'm done? And they'll, I guess, judge, because they're too close to it. They can't get away from it. And so they'll put it on Instagram, and it's all the whole world to see, That's you have to be ruthless to put your stuff up and say, what do you think?
I think so too. And I think that, I would prefer to encourage artists to not do that, because I think that when, I'm going to go back to Harold Rosenberg, when he talks about action painting, this is a personal expression of you on the canvas. And so if I start saying, well, what do you think? What do you think? Then it becomes a personal expression of Fred or Sally. You see what I mean?
Right. I agree. I don't do that. I don't put something on Instagram until I'm happy with it, because I don't want people to think, oh, that's a piece of crap. What are they doing? What were they thinking? Or sometimes I'll post something and I'll look back and say, oh God, oh well. And then I'll take it off of my Instagram collection because I realized that it wasn't where it should have been.
Yeah, it wasn't up to what you consider a good piece of work. And right. It's funny. I've taken so many classes, with teachers, and I'll get frustrated when students will walk around the room and they're always asking, like, what do you think of my work? What do you think of my work? And I really do believe that a good teacher teaches you to look within and make those decisions within.
Right. And I taught in college for 20 years and as an adjunct. And so in that time period, I found that the students, it's better to give a little suggestion and then see how they take it and go with it instead of move this here, because that, you always have students that don't want to think, And the sad part about it is I found over the last 20 years that I taught is that students started or stopped thinking more and more. And I don't know if that was because of, they're so bombarded with information, they want it fed to them. But, if I was one of the few people in advertising, I understood conceptual thinking. And so if I was teaching an advertising class, I would teach conceptual thinking. And when I started, maybe half the class would get it. And when I ended 20 years later, about 1 or 2 people would get it in the class. So it's like, maybe it's time for me to move on.
Well, I think it's interesting that you say that, because I think a good artist is teaching you how to interact with the world, but also how to interact internally. You talk about entering that below line, that line of timelessness. that is an internal experience, you
Right.
know. I don't think you enter it by asking Fred what he thinks about your painting. I think you enter it by listening to that voice inside.
Yeah, that's why sometimes I'll sleep on it. You know, the Native Americans, when they have a big decision, they sleep on it. They don't sometimes for 2 or 3 days before they make a decision. And I think they want to dream about it. And you know, in our dream world, a lot of people connect to that intuitive place in your dreams. You know, you may not even know it or not, but they want to sleep on it so that they get some perspective and space between them and the decision, and because they're getting in touch with that intuitive world. You know,
I find that I get that messages right between deep sleep, right when I'm like either waking up or falling asleep, you know, that medium place.
right?
And suddenly I'll be like, oh, and I'll see a shape or hear a phrase. Cause you know, I also write. You're right. It's, I sometimes if we just give ourselves time to process it, and some people would say that's putting that down into your subconscious, you know, you talk about Buddhism, it's that subconscious level of who we are. And it keeps working on the problem, you know?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that's what you learn from meditation. You know, sometimes you can hold the thought, maybe something you want to resolve, and then you go into meditation and you blank out your mind. You allow it to come up, so to say, your solution. That's what I call. I think I called it meditation in action. And
Yeah.
a lot of times, I got to a point where I was meditating, and I thought, well, I'm just sitting here meditating. What can I do to bring this out into the outside world? You know, well, creativity does that because you're manifesting in the physical world. But also, you know, how does meditation give you a perspective? And I found that it improves kindness, empathy, you know, a grander sense of what's going on around you in your world and everything. And so that's something that can only come through concentrating as you do things in the world, not sitting there meditating. So that's meditation in action. It's like uh, uh, a frame of mind, you know, that you take. You know, if someone comes up and they really make you mad, you know, okay, Epictetus said that it's not the things that happen to us, it's how we react to the things that happen to us. And that's a very profound statement. And so you can react in a couple of different ways. You know, meditation gives you that. It gave me a governor, something that that when I'm out in the world and something comes up, or if I'm say I was in advertising, you know, it's very stressful, and I could bring that governor in and bring myself down just with doing a couple of deep breathing exercises. And then that helped me to be aware of what I was doing in the world and bring that consciousness to the world. Because meditation, just meditating, I mean, unless you use that, it doesn't do anything, you know. And but meditating in action allows you to do that.
I like that. Now, do you feel that you meditate in action when you're actually painting? Do you
Definitely there. That's almost sort of obvious, you know. But when you're dealing with someone who just pissed you off, and you, okay, pins and needles, needles and pins, it's a happy person who grins, you know. How are you gonna react to that person, you know? And that to me is the true. I remember Swami said, "You want to know how powerful you are? Look at your daily life and find out and see how many people throw you off balance. If you get thrown off balance by people or situations, then you're not powerful, you know. And the power is being able to sort of, I'm not sure. I call it bobbing and weaving, you know. But the thing is that if something comes up, I take it as a personal challenge to bring kindness and empathy to it. You know, okay, maybe this person had a bad day. Maybe the empathy is it comes from that, or just I'll just try to maintain my composure. I don't think that anger really resolves anything. It's better to separate from a while and come back and then talk about it. So the meditative state of mind it gave me that ability to do that in the real world. So meditation in action. I think it was where I first heard of it I think it was Trungpa Rinpoche did a book called Meditation in Action. And I remember reading that. I thought, yeah, that's what I need to do. So I stopped meditating for a while. I wanted to see how I could bring that into the physical world without having to do meditation. And so I found that I could still do that, to a certain degree. I mean, I guess these, enlightened people, the real heavy-duty spiritual people can do that all the time and there's no effort because they're in that state of mind. But it's good practice.
Well, it is. And, everybody, it's just all practice. We just keep practicing it every day. You learn to practice it. And for me, you're right. I learned to be aware. For example, I learned to listen to my thoughts when I was painting, because when I started painting, I would hear thoughts in my head like, oh, you're terrible. And so I started to isolate myself and say, is that true? Am I terrible? And stand back from my thoughts. And so what you're talking about is, yes, once you do that in front of the canvas or the creative process, then you go out into the world and you find that you're talking to a coworker and you're thinking, you're terrible or whatever. Right. And you go, is that true? Is it because they like this color instead of this color? Is it true that they're terrible? No.
You have to, I call it double responsibility, because you have the responsibility for your reaction and you're taking on the responsibility of the other person's point of view. Maybe they had a bad day. Maybe there's something's going on in their life and they're taking it out on you, or maybe their just overall attitude is because something happened or somebody died in the family or whatever. And I find that it's so much better to take that double responsibility, even if they're saying nasty things about you. You still, you don't have to be around them, but the thing is that you don't have to be pulled into that,
Definitely. And I would like to repeat that with the listeners and with a different aspect too. I found that when I paint or when I'm doing something creative, it's the same thing. We need to be compassionate with ourselves. That's the hardest thing, right? It's easy to, if we make that mistake or we just waste a nice piece of paper or whatever, that compassionate with ourselves and say, it's okay, give them, what did you say? The double consideration. Double. Yeah. And to ourselves, because there's a part of us that are often, or we're so critical, and when you stand in front of that canvas, you have to move through that. You have to move through that fear of.
There's some guy that became friends with it, and he works on wood, and he builds up surfaces on his paintings and everything. And if it's not going well, he takes the belt sander and starts taking it off, and so that's like his whiteout,
Right.
And so, a joke too that with the belt sander, it's a metaphor. It allows us to go fearlessly into the creation and knowing that you have some kind of fallback. You have something where you can go a different direction if you need to. We can always paint over something. And so when we go at it with sometimes a ruthlessness, and that little voice comes on and says, well, I don't know, this is not looking very good. And then you come back at it the next day, you can, paint over or use your belt sander, and then bam, you're right back in it again.
It's funny. I usually think of whiteout, but I don't think of belt sanders. But
I know.
You're right. I think that getting past that fear of a mistake, that you can always change it, you can always tweak it. You can always erase it with a belt sander.
right?
Or white paint or whatever, and that's what's great about it. So that to me keeps me fearless to a certain extent, because if it's going in the wrong direction, I know I can paint over that area and then come back at it, in a looser way, so it doesn't lose the spontaneity that I'm looking for, and sometimes they just don't work out, you got to take that canvas and turn it toward the wall and not look at it.
Do you ever turn it back, Randy?
Yeah, but I'll still turn it back again. It might be something, like I said, though, sometimes I'll take a little piece out of it, cut it out and use it in a collage. So it's like recycling.
It is recycling, and it's always fun, I think, when you do a piece of work or you paint over something almost entirely, and there's just that little piece, a little piece of something. I remember years ago, I was so frustrated when I was just starting to paint, and I started writing, I kid you not, swear words into the canvas. I started writing swear words, and then I came back. I was calm. I grounded myself, and I painted over it. But at the art show, I could still see a little bit of that F. Just
it's part of the art.
It is part of the art. It's part of recording that action, recording your state, recording your emotional state. You know,
you got to be fearless.
So as we wind this down, what would you tell our listeners that's the biggest way to go into that fearlessness? What would you advise them? How to be fearless when they are doing an act of creativity, whether it's painting or writing or.
For one, don't think about the cost of the paper or the canvas. Just when you get that canvas, I buy several canvases, and I don't. And so, I'm looking at those. They're set aside. So I look at it as a piece of paper. So if I screw up the canvas, I can just face it toward the wall and pull out another one. So that, I think it's the biggest fear, for artists, that it's the price of what you're putting into it, because you put in a lot of paint too, and that costs money, So you got to get past the price point, and that's it. And then just sort of, everybody has their ritual, you stare out your window at nature. I stare at the canvas until something just sort of manifests, like that space on that blank canvas needs some. And so I'll take out a brush and some paint, and I'll just put something down, and then I start, that first brush stroke is the hardest.
Yeah, I found it easier. One of my exercises to just do a bunch of scribble scrabble, all over the canvas. And then I sit down and look for something that grabs my eye.
Right.
And then I play and pull on that, whether it's the colors or the composition or the texture,
And that's one of the things, like, that's the thing I like about Eastern art and Sumi painting, because it's like watercolor. And I've always had a respect for watercolors, because you put it down and that's it. That takes a lot of judgment and a lot of fearlessness, So with Sumi painting, sometimes that loosens me up. So I'll go in there and I got my 16 by 20 piece of paper, and I'll look at it, and then I'll start with a brush stroke. And if that looks good, then I'll say, okay, then 30% gray brush stroke. I'm going to go full black on this set, and I'll get the black ink out and just put something down. I'm not trying to think, so that's how I overcome my fearlessness, is that, and potential for success and failure is equal right there. And knowing when to stop, that's the thing, that's what I like about the immediacy of Sumi painting, is that you have to stop at some point. I see a lot of people posting their paintings on Instagram, and that's a great thing about Instagram. I see stuff from all over the world.
Right.
In the old days, you had to go to the library to see that stuff, and you saw the same stuff all the time. Whereas this way, you see what's going on out there. And I see some people attempting Sumi painting that you can tell their mind was blocked when they did it. Just like I can look at my stuff and, my mind it's too much of my mind was in that painting.
Hmm. Well, I love that. I love this conversation because I have started this podcast that there's a universality to all creative endeavors. But talking to another painter, obviously, since I am a painter, it's exciting. And this whole concept of Sumi brushwork and how it is recording, it's fascinating. And
it loosens you up, you know. That's what. So I'm sort of one of my favorite artists was Motherwell, and I like because he did collage, but then he also did these massive paintings or small paintings or whatever, and he would do. He said he had a writer's block one time, and so one summer, or not writer's block, but a painter's block, and he was sitting there. So he did like 500 little paintings. He just did them over and over and over and over again, these little paintings. And then eventually something finally clicked and he moved out of it, you know, and that was like his Sumi painting. He did that to loosen himself up, not to worry, to become fearless. Evidently what he felt he had become fearful. And I mentioned, you know, I've read in some stuff where he said, you know, he would ask his assistants, and they said, well, it looks like a great show, and he'd have all his pieces up before he put them up at wherever he was going to put them up. And he'd say, I'm looking at these, and I don't even know if any of this is good, you know? And so his assistant would have to talk him into it, you know? But it was always there, that fear is always there. But by jumping to Sumi painting, for me, collage, and then painting, I have these three disciplines that are really a lot different than each other. And so I'll move from one to the other. When I get bored with one, I'll move to another. And it really helps me get some perspective on my art.
There's so many things here, so many things for our listeners to focus on. I love that jumping back and forth between what I call tools in your toolbox, you know, and interplaying them, or doing that rapid fire, just a rapid fire, quick. I think the word I've heard was taught gestural. Is that correct? Gestural.
Gestural, you know.
Gestural drawings.
Also, what you were alluding to, that I talked about he was, forget what his name was.
Rosenberg.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's what he was talking about, is that immediacy of of that school of art when they started out and they were breaking all the rules, but they were really into this sort of like, do whatever comes into your mind, you know, don't restrict yourself so they were talking about this fearlessness and that spontaneity, you know, and it's interesting that Zen was really big in the West at that time, in the 50s and early 60s, you know, and so even, you know, historically, when they were rebuffing everything that was happening in Europe, and they decided to do this new school, they were breaking all the rules. And one of the rules is that loosen up, you know, that fearlessness will come out. That'll be that thing that connects with the viewer when they see it. I remember one time I followed a whole bunch of kids that were doing a tour through the Art Institute of Chicago. And I thought, well, I'll just follow around and see what the teacher is telling the kids. And what I learned is that the paintings that they most responded to were Van Gogh. And that's why there was nothing between him and his emotion. When what he put down on that canvas was emotion, you know, and they responded to that. You know, the tight, you know, that's perfectly realistic stuff, you know, that bored them. But they like the abstract expressionism or the impressionists. And so they responded well to them.
Wow. It's that emotion, recording that emotion on canvas, being immediate, being fearless. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time. I probably have to bring you back for other conversations, but I love this conversation. I love that we've explored this on a broad spectrum. So many things here. And I definitely might have you come back in some future date. I love this concept of the Sumi brushwork and how you can incorporate that.
Yeah, I love it. You know, it really frees you up, but it's also it's so easy to make a mistake,
Yeah. And then
to be fearless.
you bring out the sander and you sand that mistake away.
Whatever works, whatever it gets, that's how you start over in a part of a painting,
Yeah.
But I thought it was like a metaphor that we always have an out,
Yeah, we always have an out. So, hey, I will put your bio and your artwork on this podcast so people can read it at the bottom. I encourage people to look at your work because, like I said, I respond to it. I respond to the freedom of it. It's really nice and open and airy, and I love it. So, you have a.
I like your artwork too. There, I can see some in the background there.
I'm getting more and more fearless. How's that? So, all right. Well, you take care, Randy, and we'll talk again soon.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks again for listening to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. Whether you're watching this show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or iHeartRadio, make sure you choose the subscribe button so that you will receive updates when new segments are released. Most importantly, be still, listen, and know that you are a spiritual artist.